And I'm really happy to introduce Erin, although I think that we know her quite well. She's been one of the leading theologians on AI, been one of the first to have written about AI, and um, has been a consultant to WACC, an author of the Digital Justice Study Guide and the Just Digital online course, which is going to be kind of featured today, plus lecturing for journalists, for doing communication, ecumenical communication and engagement in so many different fields. So I think many of us know Erin in her different many capabilities and expertise. So Erin, I'm happy to turn this over to you as we talk about digital justice in real time.
Thank you, Sarah. And we forgot to mention just that we're friends. I'm friends with a lot of people here, so it's for me this is quite nice. I just get to spend some time with you this morning, talk a little bit about the work that we've done together, uh, and talk about a little bit what's going on in the world. Can everyone see my screen? All right. Good. Okay. All right, it's about five after. Good. So I had this great idea a few weeks ago, to talk about what's going on in the news. And then I regretted that decision when I was preparing for this because it's not super cheerful stuff. So I was thinking, wow, what a great choice. But I do think it's important, and I think that when I was preparing for our time together, it really underscored how important the work that WACC is undertaking on digital justice, because it is still not something that's really well understood. And it's something that is still missing from our largely digital world. So I will walk you through it. So as Sarah mentioned, we worked on this awesome course called Just Digital. And there's two parts. One is kind of a basic 101, orienting you to some digital justice topics. And the other one, the other part that we just recently launched is 6 lessons that really try to make the connection between other topics in justice and the digital. So, for example, we talk about the environment, gender bias, sexism, all of these kind of things. So, when you look at these 6 topics, these are the titles of the lessons. We try to show how digital justice is not a separate issue, that it's something that's actually woven into all other aspects of human rights, communication rights, civil rights, other forms of justice, and so on. And not only is it just interwoven, but it impacts how these topics unfold. So, for example, we all know that AI is a huge topic right now, and it uses a lot of water. So that's going to have a direct impact on ecology, sustainability, and so on. So what we really, really try to do in this course is show that just digital is not something separate, but something that really needs to be taken seriously if we want to make progress and see any kind of, advancement in rights in any of these other sectors. So what I thought would be interesting to do is to show in our world, we get up, we check our phones, we look at the news, we go online and our email and stuff. Everything is digital, but how is the digital represented? So I did a little bit of tour of some news websites this morning to show, okay, what are the problems in the world? What's grabbing our attention? What are the search engines? What are people clicking on? And so on and so on. So I take a quick look at The Guardian sometimes when I feel like it. So you can see here are some of the headlines. So if you scroll down on the Guardian website this morning, you see, who, and his beautiful picture at the top. You see things about ecological crisis. You see some stuff about development and aid. You see things about Gaza, of course, and on and on and on. So a lot of expected topics, but what you see is there's actually nothing explicitly about digital justice in any of this, right? So where is the digital justice questions when we're talking about water stress? Where is digitality when it comes to music and pop culture? Where are, questions about communication rights on digital platforms and technologies when we talk about journalism in Palestine, and so on and so on. So if you look at the headlines, you have this really strong perception the digital doesn't matter, right? That the digital is not grabbing our attention. The digital is something apart. It's tangential. It's not a reason for these problems, nor is it part of a potential response or solution to it. So I scanned a whole bunch of international news sites from different parts of the world. I even looked at our regional news here in Flanders in the northern part of Belgium. And all that I saw relating explicitly to the digital were, two cursory mentions of the impact of AI on jobs and education. And that's it, right? So it's understandable that the consciousness about digital justice is very poor when this is the kind of the ecosystem that people are getting their news and information from. So if you believe the headlines, we live in an analog world, right? So even when we look at these news stories and you do a deeper dive, there's rarely a mention on how digitalization shapes the story at all. Sometimes we hear about Gen AI when it grabs a headline and so on and so on, but it largely means that we're exposed to content that misses a critical angle. So we don't even have a full picture of some of the things that are at play. So I'm going to take a closer look at 3 examples. And forgive me if these are very, very basic and you already know all of these things. I am not a large consumer of news. I find it has an incredibly negative impact on my mood. So I prefer to read books because if I read a book about a topic, I find it's more satisfying. You get a little bit more in depth. I don't judge anyone for reading the news, but I just know that, I get quite easily sucked into doom scrolling. So I'm not the most, current topic savvy person in the world. But I thought it would be interesting to take a look at a few situations. So Greenland, what's digital about it? Right. So if you're looking at the stories about Greenland and what's going on there, it's a lot about, potential NATO activities, sending soldiers there. It's about, certain politicians talking to other certain politicians and so on and so on. It's about sovereignty, it's about colonialism, and on and on and on. But what is almost never mentioned is the strategic significance of the American Pacific Space Base, which is critical for global missile surveillance and also space surveillance. I didn't know that. And what obviously is happening there, that's all reliant on digital technologies, the gathering of data, for example, the deployment of AI and global surveillance and so on. What is also connected to issues of digital justice in Greenland are the rare earth metals. So of the 30 rare earth metals listed by the EU as essential for the economy, 25 are found in Greenland. So what do we need these for? Semiconductors, batteries, lasers, magnets, nuclear energy, and even building military airplanes. So there's a one kind of metal that's in Greenland, and it's needed for the magnets that are somehow deployed in fighter jet technologies and so on. So you can see, even with a cursory look, that questions around digitality, questions around digital justice are right there. They're not even at the surface, or I think at the fore, but they're not being picked up, whether that's due to the pressure for journalists to turn out too many stories, whether it's about optimizing headlines for click-through rates and so on. But you can see that once you just take a quicker look, that these questions that are of concern in the course that we developed are right there for us to see. Another headline that grabbed my attention was about the water stress. So it said half of the cities in the world will be experiencing water stress. And you think, well, what's digital about that, right? Of course, there's going to be water stress given climate catastrophe, increasing drought, increasing flooding, and so on. But of course, where are water resources going? So at the fore of this, there's a lot of discussion about data centers requiring massive amounts of water and other natural resources for cooling. We've talked a bit about that in the course as well. These are diverting essential resources for human life from people who need it to, our consumption of digital technologies. What's also interesting too is that increasingly, we live in wealthy countries, and in privileged spaces in so-called smart cities, right? And so smart cities have the ability to purchase and deploy and implement all kinds of technologies to optimize water conservation, to, for example, purchase satellite or acquire satellite imagery to look at patterns of water stress, use increasingly sophisticated forecasting, to even do leak detection, so that water is better conserved, and so on and so on. And all of this smart city technology that is connected to potential water stress in these kind of large cities and so on, of course, costs money and of course is owned, right? And so one of the big questions that we ask in the digital justice course is a lot about the ownership of data, the sovereignty of data, and so on. So cities, like I live here in Belgium, so a city like Antwerp or Brussels would certainly be interested in these technologies, but not have the capacity to build their own smart water system ecosystem, right? So that would be bought from, a large tech company. And then the question would be, who owns that water usage data? How is that deployed? How is it sold? And on and on and on and on. So you see this cycle where the wealthy are able to procure these technological solutions, better deploy them to protect their own water conservation, and so on. And places that are already vulnerable just continue to be made more and more vulnerable. And then finally, I thought I would pick a fun example just, so that we don't leave the session totally depressed. But I thought we would talk about Taylor Swift. So this was one of the images I had to take down so that we didn't get in trouble with the Swifties. So one of the headlines was Taylor Swift becomes second youngest ever named to Songwriters Hall of Fame. So regardless of what you think of her songwriting capability, this was one of the headlines this morning on The Guardian. So what is the digital justice aspect to this? I mean, this is a privileged thing. It doesn't matter that much in the grand scheme of things. However, if you go way back, music has been largely digitally recorded and produced for about the last 20 years. These are increasingly expensive digital technologies. You need the know-how, you need to have access to the studios, and so on and so on. Then you have to distribute them. Increasingly, these are digital-only platforms that are dominated by algorithms, and the algorithms tend to favor already popular artists. And so it becomes a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're popular, you will remain popular, and so on. It means that people who can get onto the platforms, they often need millions and millions of streams to even earn a minimum wage. And so it excludes people from kind of this sphere of influence that might lead to such accolades. I saw a really good comment about Spotify Wrapped. So for those of you who are on Spotify, you know that at the end of the year, the streaming service makes a really kind of fun and trendy branded presentation of your most listened to songs. Mine is often a bit messed up because I listen to like music to fall asleep, like this ambient music. So Spotify thinks I'm a really new agey person. And then also like my kids listen to the Smurf music a lot. So my Spotify Wrapped is not so good. But Spotify is kind of fun because it gives you a message from your favorite artists and it makes a top 5 list and it lets you save your top 25 or top songs from last year and so on and so on. And someone said, Spotify has done a great job of making surveillance fun. So, all of this is kind of connected to the topics that we look at in the course. So when we look at things for, the ownership of the music, when we look at how it's distributed, when we look at, what counts as fair labor and how should people be compensated for it, when we look at things like the kind of information that all of these streaming platforms, all of our digital platforms collect on us and how these are used to kind of further turn us into a product to, get us to subscribe to this or go to this concert and so on and so on. So these are just like 3 kind of quick and high level examples of, headlines that had the opportunity to touch on the digital and missed it, right? And so I think, a great first step. So I'm going to come back to the why of this course, right? So why do we need just digital? Why do we need this kind of movement that WACC Global and WACC Europe and others are working on. Why do we need this? It's because there's a massive gap in the understanding of the real time and the digital, right? And if you leave the digital out, I would say you're only getting a small part of the story. And I think with that small part of the story, you're not able to effectively propose solutions or advocate or find ways to resist or to find ways to organize community if you fail to understand the impact of the digital. So we're going to hear a little bit from our friend Matt, who has actually done a really deep dive into the course that we worked on. And I'm curious, I'm going to turn it over to him in a moment. I just wanted to conclude to say that, you know, this Just Digital course, you think, oh, well, digital topics are always changing and there's new technologies and that kind of things. And I was really happy when I look back at the course this morning that it took almost 3 years to build it, start to finish, the whole thing. And I have to say, even the content that we worked on very early on remains as relevant then as it is today. So it's stuff that is really kind of looking at things that can be applied to a number of different technologies, a number of different contexts. And we think that, you know, it's just a small thing, but we hope it will inspire you to make these connections when you open up the websites in your own context, when you kind of open up your own social media feed, and so on and so on. So with that, I'm going to stop and I'm going to turn it over to Matt to give you kind of more of a first-hand review of what Just Digital is like for him.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Erin. First of all, bore da. Matthew ydw I, dwi'n byw yng Nghaerdydd. So I doubt very many of you know what I just said. I'm from Wales and I speak Welsh as well. And so there's so many reasons why the digital justice course was fascinating for me, because it really spoke into a particular context that I work in. So I work as a freelance church communication specialist, and my academic work is in digital culture and religious authority. But in my day job as director of communications, I have a responsibility to use communication and digital platforms and digital services ethically and responsibly. So I was very, very keen to do this course, and I chose to do it during Lent. So I wanted it to be part of my Lent studies and to really, really give myself an opportunity to think through how I, as a director of communications, are able to ensure that how we use these platforms are ethical and responsible as well. So in terms of how I used the course, I went from the beginning to the end. And I honestly thought I knew a lot about digital justice. I thought, you know, I know the cloud use lots of water. I know AI has got some issues, all this kind of thing. What I didn't realize was the massive global impact that it has on minority languages like Welsh, for example, that it has on women and you know, the people who are targeted through hate as well in an online platform. There was so much that I needed to think through in terms of my own response to digital as well. There was a couple of things that really stood out for me. So I was saying earlier, before we started this session, that I've got about 20 odd tabs open on the top of my screen, and half of those are still from the digital justice course, because as you go through it in modules. And it's not something you can rush through. I found that I had to give a lot of time to this, a lot of time to understand the impact and what people were saying. What I absolutely loved, though, were these side quests that they have at the end of each module, where if you're interested in doing a deep dive into a particular subject, so for me, it was globalization, that and environmental impact. That's what really sang to me. During these side quests, you've got all this loads more information that you can follow and understand a lot more in detail about it. I found the course was incredibly good for beginners. Like, And even if you are an expert in this, the way the course unfolds and the resources that have been chosen break the information down into really understandable pieces of information that you can pass on to people. So I've been having conversations that I'm not struggling to articulate why we need to be taking digital justice seriously, because of the content that I have found and the videos that have been found and the pieces of information that have been explained incredibly well to me. I want to talk a little bit about how it's impacted my work. So accessibility and globalization, probably the two that I really honed in on because of my own experience with work. At the moment, we're going through a lot of change with a new website, etc. And after I did the accessibility section of it, I was thinking, now, I wonder if our content is accessible. I'm not sure it is. And even doing the course, it was so easy to use, so intuitive. The language was really straightforward and the branding just worked, really well for me. So I've been looking at our branding and discovered that actually it doesn't meet the requirements for accessibility. So we now really need to think about the kind of branding and accessibility features on the current website as we move over to a new one to ensure that all people can access our information as well. I've also been thinking a lot about, as I said, globalization, because I live in Wales. We are a bilingual diocese, and algorithms, there's a tendency to think, oh, if you want your content read in Wales, you better do it in English and just have a little bit of Welsh. But actually, that's not helping the Welsh language at all, which is a minority language. So actually, we should be paying far more attention to the impact that digital is having on our language. And we as a bilingual diocese, I think, have an ethical responsibility to model a very good approach in how we do bilingual communications, so that our language isn't just a minority in Welsh-speaking communities, but is something that people see is spoken across the world, that is spoken across Wales and is spoken across the UK. And I think that, for me, was something that really opened my eyes to the importance of, and the double-edged sword of globalization. Great, it gets our message and our word out to a lot of places, but actually it can hinder us by reaching as many people as, say, some of the other dioceses that just focus on English content. So we have to work harder at being more creative with our communications to ensure that what people see when they come from us is equal. So Welsh is equal to English on everything. And then it's a question of, do we chase numbers, or is it important for us that we are providing good quality content to people that is bilingual? So those are just some of the things that really spoke to me as I was doing the course. The other one I want to close on then is the environmental impact, and the impact digital has, which perhaps you haven't thought about this, on Welsh as a way of communicating. And by which I mean the environmental impact is, everyone's rushing. We're trying to be like this eco church. We're trying to be like an eco diocese that takes care of our green spaces and our church buildings. Not once have I had a conversation about our digital footprint and our digital impact. And I say this as someone who has seen AI come to me and used every day, to the point where I just think, I don't think people are actually realizing the impact this is having. The impact is having on environmental, that has been talked to already, but also the impact on trust. So I see a lot of AI generated imagery and posters come through, and I look at that and I'm thinking, something's not right. It doesn't look right. I'm not trusting this information. I'm not trusting it. So AI and trust is a big issue. I'm very, very careful, and we're writing a policy right now about AI use and how to use it responsible, because I've really given this a lot of thought from here. The other thing then I want to talk about is AI and Welsh language and translation. Now, it's all very exciting that you can translate into any language that you like, and we use it. But I'm also incredibly aware about the environmental impact, but also about what is this doing to jobs. So, there are professional translators we're taking work away from them. And Wales is a very niche, minority language, and we shouldn't be taking work away from people who have specialized in the richness of the Welsh grammar, the richness of the Welsh language. To be putting it through AI and just getting a word for word translation, which is not what translation's about. So again, we are thinking a lot about how we use AI. We don't just translate stuff and think we've done it. We've got a team of Welsh language specialists and experts who've got degrees in language, etc., that we call upon, and we use our translators as well. But I think it's we've got to be careful that we don't just run everything through translation and think we've just done good enough to our language. I think it sells us short, and so that's something that again we're writing a policy to look at these impacts and how we can reflect more ethically on our use of digital. And all of that has come from over Lent, me doing the course. And having my eyes open, and that's why I wrote a short blog about it, because I was really inspired by the work that is going on by WACC. And thank you, Erin, for a course that has just answered the questions that I didn't know I needed to be asking. So thank you very much.